welcome to the Craft House Magic Setters tutorials. My name's Ellie and today I'm going to chat to you about how I do my free motion quilting. So what you'll need to free motion quilt is to use a sewing machine, and I find it useful to have a sewing machine that you can drop the feed dogs. So the feed dogs are these little teeth underneath your machine that help drag the fabric through as you're sewing. So I have a button that just drops them. If you just saw them just drop down there, you should be able to find how to drop your feed dogs in your manual for your sewing machine, but you can actually free motion without dropping these, but it just makes it a little bit more difficult to accurately control your fabric. So that's number one. Number two, you'll need a darning foot. I like the darning feet that are open at the front here, and I prefer the plastic ones so you can actually see through the foot itself as well. But you'll need one that's actually for your machine, so don't look for one that looks exactly like this. You just need a darning foot with an open toe at the front. I like to use Schmetz top stitch needles for free motion quilting because they've got a larger eye. You end up not skipping stitches so much, so those are a good thing to have if you're free motion quilting. The next thing you need to do is make sure that you adjust your tension correctly when you're stitching. I know that when I'm stitching on my machine that my tension needs to be set at 2.6. I've got a digital machine so I can adjust it on the panel up here, but you might have a tension to the top of your machine here, but just if you look at your manual you'll be able to tell how to adjust your tension. So normally you might have your tension on between sort of 4 or 5 to do standard stitching, but I find that I quite often on several machines that I've used I've need to reduce it, and for this one I use 2.6. but for your machine you'll have to check and make sure that you've got your tension correct for your machine, and it may change with the thickness of the wadding or the thread that you're using as well. Another thing that I find quite important is make sure that you've got the thread that you've got for your bobbin and you've actually got on the spool on the top of your machine. Make sure that they're actually the same weight, otherwise you might have issues. I like to use a pair of Machingers gloves so that I can grip onto the fabric correctly, but if you're doing quite a small piece you don't need these as much, although I do find them quite nice. They just make it a lot easier on your hands. Another thing I like to do is make sure that I'm actually sat quite high up on my seat in front of my machine so that I don't get achy shoulders, because if I'm sat too low and my elbows are coming down like I am now, I end up getting achy shoulders. So I will higher my seat up a little bit just so that I can be at a nice high position. It doesn't hurt my shoulders when I'm free motion stitching. I've got an adjustable seat, but you could also stick a cushion underneath you just to lift you up a little bit. So I'll get my sewing machine foot onto my machine. So there we are, all threaded up. On my machine, because it's an electronic machine, I have to tell it that it's actually going to be doing free motion. So I have to set it to a dynamic spring foot 6D, and then I also have to change my thread tension to 2.6 like I said before. But also make sure that you've actually played around with the tension before you do your best piece of free motion. Do lots and lots of sample tests. So I'll put my gloves on. I've already dropped my feed dogs so they're ready to go. There we go. So these Machingers have got a rubberized tips on the fingers so that you can get a good grip on your fabric. So I'm just going to be doing some outlines on some of these designs on my advent calendar. I've got a separate video for how I make my advent calendar and I'll leave a link down below. So I threaded my needle and I'm going to carefully start. I'm going to start by his wing on the little owl, so I will make sure I've got plenty of thread at the back of the work. So I've positioned my needle above where I want to start doing my free motion stitching, and I use the hand wheel to turn the needle into the fabric, and then I lift the needle up again, and then I use my thread to pull up my bobbin thread from underneath. And I've always got a handy pair of tweezers that help me pull the thread out. So you've got your 2 threads at the top of your work, and I pop those underneath the foot and to the back out of the way. I place my fingers around the needle so that they're carefully not too close to the needle, but you're controlling the fabric so it's nice and flat. I'll press the foot, the control foot underneath the table, and I will stitch back over myself a couple of times, and then I will control the speed of my stitching carefully, and also the speed that I'm moving my hands. So you'll quite often need to stop what you're doing and reposition your hands so that you've got lots of space and you don't end up doing messier stitches because you've got less control. So you want to get a consistent stitch length around wherever you're stitching. And here I'm just going to stitch around the Christmas pudding and come back to where I started. So for finishing off, when you want to stop free motion stitching, you just stitch on the same position a couple of times, and then I will lift my presser foot up and pull the thread to the sides and cut my threads. And then I can go back and thread a needle into these threads and thread them into the wadding at the back of the fabric. So here I've stitched into fabric that is just layered straight onto some wadding, but most of the time I'll do some quilting through the 3 layers where you've got backing on as well. But because I'm going to bag this out and use it as a pocket on the front of an advent calendar, I've just done it straight onto the wadding. You can find a tutorial for the advent calendar in the link down below that I've already done. So there we are, that's a little bit of free motion stitching. I hope you have a little go too. It's lots of fun. It can be frustrating at times to start with because it's difficult to get used to controlling the fabric in this way. But I hope you enjoy having a go. Thank you for watching this tutorial. If you'd like to see more, like and subscribe, and don't forget to click the little bell button if you want to have notifications when I put up a new video. So thank you for watching, happy crafting, see you next week, bye!